Hey, this is Don down at Antiques, Uniques, and Metaphysics. And Bob from Manitowalk writes, Shaman Don, how do shamans understand the four elements with regard to shamanic practice? Well, that's a good question, Bob. Ooh, Mother Gaia. So, from a shamanic perspective, everything is energy and everything is alive. Everything in some way is family, regarded as family. You saw my clip on monism. I don't know that a shaman would discuss metaphysical monism or not. However, shamans do regard uh, everything that's a part of the earth as in some sort of familial relationship. So, they'll talk about, the standing brothers, which would be the trees, maybe the mountains, or the four-legged ones, which would be like their cousins, the animals, right? The horses and the deer. Everything is regarded as family. What that implies is even what we consider to be, you know, inanimate objects, rocks and trees, perhaps, and mountains and valleys and the ocean, ponds, things like that. From a shamanic perspective, all of those things are alive. And again, not merely alive, but alive and a part of our family. There's a term that scholars use called reciprocal relationship, such that shamans believe that everything should be in balance, right? So if you think back in terms of Native American tribes, uh, yeah, they killed buffalo, ate buffalo, and used the hides for tents and etc. But it's not like they just wiped them all out. Um, it's every bit as much a task for those communities to preserve the life of everything around them, which involves preserving their own life as well. So, so again, everything is alive and everything is family. And that's just sort of from the perspective of tribal people, sacred indigenous people, really all over the world, right? So for the shaman in particular, though, um, you might say just like we would enter into relationships with different things, like the way we relate to dogs or cats or people in general, shamans have that perspective on all the different elements that exist. So uh, we would relate to Earth in all of its many expressions and forms, whether that be as mountain or a clump of trees or peninsula or island, right, or valley or whatever it might be. So any and all of the expressions of Earth, along with water, as ocean, as rain, right, as pond and river, uh, air, as cloud, um, spirit, wind, um, and fire, right, um, as sort of spark, as heat, as sunlight, um, and as fire. That those four elements uh, and those expressions, shamans have a general relationship, you might say, with them, much like an individual person would have relationships with dog or cat or person, right, or whatever that might be. And then beyond that, there are individual relationships that shamans enter into. So just like you might have your own pet dog, right? So I relate to dogs in a certain way because I like dogs, perhaps. But then I've got my own pet dog, and that's even a more intense, special relationship. So I might relate to people in a certain way, because maybe I like people. Um, but I might have particular friends or particular family members, etc., that I would relate to more specifically. I understand their characters better, right? And we've built a relationship perhaps over time. So there is the general, then there is the individual kind of relationships that shamans establish. So that might explain, and in fact it does, why shamans might include certain elements of the natural world, even like in their pouch, so that they might have some stones, uh, maybe a bone of an animal, maybe some feathers, different things like that in their pouch, that they've developed specific relationships with those items. Now, again, remember, everything is alive and everything is energy. More than that, shamans will talk about things as not merely being alive, but having particular power, right? And that's sort of how we might talk about it in terms of energy. But these various items or experiences in the natural world can be understood in different ways. One is sort of like as omens, right? So that when things happen and it gets cloudy and starts to rain, and it starts thundering and lightning, all that sort of stuff, relative to what the shaman has been experiencing, or how the shaman interprets that particular experience at a particular time, that could be an omen for something that's about ready to happen. So, omens are a part of what shamans understand as sacred dialogue, dialoguing with spirit through the language of nature. That is an entire session of its own. But that's one way that shamans relate to the natural world. That includes all of the different elements. Um, so that a shaman might want to know, right, uh, which direction is the wind coming from, right? What time of day is it? Did I see an animal before, during, or after, or how many animals did I see when this, you know, wind and storm brewed up? So there goes the deer. I'm starting to feel the wind. It's, dusk. Here comes the thunder and lightning, right? The combination of all those, it's just like a language. It's like verbs and nouns and modifiers and adjectives and all that kind of stuff for the shaman, right? It's a language. It's how the shaman dialogues again with spirit. And then also, shamans will understand there being particular places in the natural world that will be conducive to certain ceremonies or experiences that the shaman might want to have. So, for example, most shamans will have a particular place that they would go to physically or maybe spiritually. We talked about this a little bit in the out of body thing. In order to journey out of body, it might be a particular tree, it could be a spring coming up out of the ground, uh, you know, a cave in the side of a hill, right? It could be out in the middle of the ocean. So that functions in a certain way for a shaman, right? A particular place in nature as sort of the portal to journey to the upper, lower, or this realm. Also, there might be particular places that a shaman would go to for specific ceremonies, uh, such that it might be, a group of trees together in a certain kind of way out in the forest, or a particular place in the desert. Or again, it could be like a little small island out in the water. Depending on where the shaman is at, there will be places in nature where the shaman would go to, in order to have a particular ceremony. It could be a healing ceremony. It could be a ceremony by which the shaman is performing an exorcism on somebody. It could be um, the place where the shaman would go, perhaps, to initiate an apprentice, right? So, and those might not always be the same place. There could be different places there as well. So we've got, shamans relate to nature, to the four elements, you might say, in general ways, uh, also in specific individual ways, forming particular relationships with certain aspects of nature. And then within nature, certain places might be used that would be conducive for the shaman. And again, you're developing a relationship. It sort of takes time to develop a relationship with an area or with a particular item, you might say. So, what about these items? These sort of power objects, sometimes they're called, that a shaman might even keep in their pouch. Um, well, again, they're used for various reasons. It could be in terms of healing. It could be that, the shaman might want to um, communicate with particular allies or energy helpers, spirit helpers through particular objects, um, which, again, that's going to probably be another entire uh, presentation about allies and spirit helpers and all those sorts of things. But if I am, if I have, let's say, a hawk as my spirit helper, my animal spirit, I might have a hawk feather. Don't know if I'm allowed to. It might be illegal. Uh, but I might have that in my pouch as a means to utilize the power and the energy of the hawk. For me personally, also as a conduit for spirit to work through in terms of bringing about healing or teaching or counseling for others. So when it comes to the four elements, right, they're all utilized and they all have different kinds of meanings associated with them. And, when you think about it, earth energy, Mother Gaia, but that includes all four elements really, because it's, the energies of the earth, but specifically the earth element. When you think about soil and tree and those sorts of things, I mean, it's the food and the herbs that come up out of the ground uh, that we use for a healthy body. And you think about, air. It's really what keeps us alive, right? It's sort of the respiratory system of the earth, and it's what keeps our respiratory system going as well. Water as nourishment also. Uh, so we've got food and we've got water. So the water is really sort of like the circulatory system of the earth, right? But it nourishes us along with the food, right? Our bodies. And then fire is interesting, right? Fire is in some sense destructive, burns things up so that things can start anew. So fire is always regarded as sort of a transformative element. Fire does other things as well, right? And this gets us a little bit into the final notion of a sacred circle. So fire as light and warmth bring people together. So it was very common, in tribal communities, still is, and for us too, to create fires and gather around the fire, right, for stories or for ceremonies or for whatever we might be doing. So fire itself, right, as sort of that which brings people together for light and for warmth. But even the coming together is typically a transformative experience, right? Fire itself is transforming, right? It is consuming fuel, transforming that right into gases, and it's sort of a constant process as long as fire is maintained of doing that. So it's this constant process of transformation. Also, the elements can be understood in terms of numbers, number value, and numbers are always important for shamans. How many deer, all right, those sorts of things. Is it one deer, two deer, three deer, four deer? And did you see? And that makes a difference. So one tends to represent spirit, right? A spiritual matter. Spirit is communicating in some particular way, um, and that is air. So for a shaman, right, air, cloud, sky, that's spirit, and that's one. Two is regarded as water, right? You jump into the river and you go from here to there. That's the two-ness of it. And two tends to represent relationship or perhaps communication that's going on. I'm getting into sacred dialogue just a little bit, but relative to these elements. Three is fire. That's, when you see a fire, it's sort of that pyramidal shaped thing. That's transformation. Um, so fire is representing change in some form or fashion, hopefully for the better. Always ultimately in terms of progress. Uh, Again, even destruction makes way for new growth and new life. And then, of course, the earth would be four, the four corners of the earth, the four directions, that sort of thing. And earth is normally practical matters, right? Things we need to consider relative to the practical world. So, in a sacred circle, when you create one, typically in some fashion, all of those elements will be represented. I mean, it's hard not to be. Even, fire itself involves air, and it typically involves earth. Uh, and if you go through the process of, if you think of the old days, even like rubbing sticks together and creating friction, right? You're utilizing earth to create fire. You blow on it to get it going, and then you've got this process of fire, which again involves a transformation specifically of the consumption of fuel, the transformation of that to gases that's released into the air. So those three elements are used, and then if the fire is put out with water, right, sort of seal the deal at the end, water is an element involved as well. And if you think of the ceremony itself, if you happen to be sipping a little water or something like that as you go through the ceremony, um, for some sort of, ceremonial purpose of taking a sip of some liquid, perhaps. Uh, all of the elements tend to be utilized in a sacred circle. And sacred circle is basically just a term that means we are about to do something here. We're creating sacred space in order for something of spiritual significance to take place. Um, Whatever that might be. Again, it could be a healing, it could be just discussion, talking about stuff, um, counseling, those sorts of things. Right. But for shamans, it's like um, the ceremony is somehow important because the ceremony uh, is sort of the trigger or the switch, right? So let's just sit and chat for a while. Well, what do we want to chat about? Well, it's I've got some important issues on my mind. Ooh, well then let's create a sacred circle, right? Let's create a sacred space to where we realize that during this time we're really inviting spirit in to not even just observe or even participate, but almost guide us. Um, I might have mentioned before, I don't know, but the word dialogue, dialogos, and the fact that the logos, that Greek word, was considered to be the consciousness of the universe. And Socrates believed that if two people got together and dialogued, dialogos, meaning discuss things by utilizing the consciousness of the universe, that if those people were open, humble, not defensive, that great insights could come forth. So true dialogue really doesn't involve just the two people. They're almost more like a vehicle for getting to truth. So the more open and honest, and the more you really create like a sacred space for dialogue to occur, the better opportunity spirit has, the consciousness of the universe, the logos, to come in and literally uh, bring about insight, right? To enable the people to recognize things that in our day-to-day mundane technical term world of going here and getting about the business of doing stuff, those things wouldn't come up. So there is a sacredness to dialogue itself. There's a sacredness to healing ceremonies, exorcisms, weddings, funerals, any and all of those things, transitions from one phase to another phase of life. Those should all be regarded as spiritually significant, and shamans do regard those in that way. Hence the need to create sacred circle, sacred space for that to occur. And again, within those ceremonies, the elements will be included. And specifically, they'll be included, like we mentioned before, in a general way, but also the shaman will bring in particular individual elements that the shaman, he or she has entered into relationship with. These particular stones, these particular feathers, right? This particular bone, this snake skin, whatever it might be, right? This piece of tree, I got a little cedar, right? So whatever the particular things might be, the shaman will bring those in as well. And that's of comfort to the shaman. It's part of the shaman's family, right? As all elements and all earth is. But I know these better, right? I'm comfortable with these particular things. So those would be involved as well. So, Bob from Anitawak, I hope this kind of answers your question a little bit. The elements are indeed important, and they're important again primarily because they're viewed as being alive. Uh, they are family. They have power, and uh, power is not an egotistical word for shamans. Power is sort of like the wattage by which a shaman is able to connect with spirit to enable spirit to come through. So if you think of a light bulb, right? So the higher wattage it is, the more light that's produced. Um, it's sort of that notion. So it's not power just in the sense that I'm power hungry and I want a bunch of power. But if I'm facilitating healing on behalf of the spirit or trying to move somebody through dialogue into insight, into certain realizations about their life or progress in their life or whatever it might be, then the better I'm able to do that, then the better I'm able to let spirit come through, right, to enable that to happen. And hence, the elements are involved as that, sort of like as in that regard, transducers of energy from spirit to practical insight, from spirit to practical healing. So it's like we're creating a situation by which the elements are involved for spirit to come through and be actualized through those elements. And again, sacred dialogue, that'll be something we'll talk about on another clip. As spirit helpers, animal spirits, those sorts of things too. So anyway, we'll call it quits for the day. Hope you all are doing well, and thanks for tuning in and giving us a look every now and then. These are kind of informal, off the top of my head. Mother Gaia. So y'all take care.